Hey everybody, and we're back to the next episode of Site Selectors Are People 2. Thanks again for joining. I appreciate it. My name is Devin Hillsdon-Smith. I'm the host of this podcast. And so last time was a bit of an experiment. I'm never going to do one of these again without at least some sort of outline. I went back and listened to it. And oh boy, man, I hope you enjoyed my inability to determine the difference between former and latter and, calling something the big sexy. But we are going to try to bring this back in. We're going to rein it back in here. And in acknowledgement of the fact that I am recording this on Friday the 10th, which is technically the last day of Economic Development Week, we are going to do this episode featuring how to strengthen the Site Selector Economic Developer Partnership. And we're going to start off with how we better empower economic developers. So what site selectors can do better. We're then going to flip it over and we're going to look at how we can empower site selectors, what economic developers can do better, tell a few stories, and put the bow on it, wrap it up, and send it off to the presses. So, again, I wanted to go back to the fact that this is Economic Development Week. I think it's fantastic that our profession has an entire week dedicated to the professionals that, you think they get a lot of praise for what they do. They get to be there for groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, but you are seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? The amount of work that goes on behind the scenes that your economic developers put in and day out to serve your community, it's mind-boggling. Most economic development organizations have smaller staffs. For the majority of, quote-unquote average-sized communities around the United States, you've probably got a staff of, 3 to 5 if you're lucky. Some locations have much bigger staff, right? Entire departments. But you have to remember that these folks are being asked to do a lot with very little resources. When I was in economic development, it was not abnormal for me to pull 80-hour weeks, right? Salaried, working 80 hours a week, because that's what the job required, right? And when the job requires it, that's what you do, especially when you love what you do and you love your community. And I think a point there to be made as well about this tip of the iceberg. We keep referring to the RFI, right? The relationship and the interaction between site selectors and economic developers. We have to remember that attraction projects or expansion projects, heck, retention projects are only one facet of economic development. Economic developers are out trying to create strategy for their community, trying to stay on top of local news and local developments, ensuring that they always have a seat at the table for the voice of economic development and business interests and economic well-being. Yes, there's a lot of time that goes into celebrating businesses that are expanding or relocating into their communities, right? But there's strategy, there's investor affairs, there's external affairs, there's community affairs, there's media relations, there's making sure that, us darn pesky site selectors remember who they are, right? And so going on marketing trips, trying to make sure that all of your partners are aligned on various projects or just in general, from the state level down to your utilities to your workforce partners. And I mean, as I posted on LinkedIn, it truly takes a village to build a community. And it's not just the economic developers, the traditional economic developers working at the state or local levels that this week celebrates. It's also about all of our partners, right? This could not be done without our partners. This is a collaborative team sport. There's a lot of knockdown, drag you out in it, right? Because you're always going to find some sort of roadblock that you have to knock down, or you have to figure out whether or not it's there for good reason. But we have to remember, as we're celebrating Economic Development Week, that we're also celebrating all of our partners, both private sector, public sector, nonprofits, you name it, right? Whether they be in our communities or they operate to serve on behalf of our communities at some different level. So I just wanted to end that little introduction with a huge shout out and thank you to all of my friends and colleagues and those who I don't even know yet in economic development. You are doing fantastic work. when at the end of the week, you feel like you just don't have another breath to take because you've been going so hard. Just keep pushing, because we notice, we respect you, we love you, and I'm going to leave it at that. So today we're going to talk about empowering both sides, right? What can I do better for you, and what can you do better for me? So I feel like a lot of the times we get stuck in a rut. We just do things the way that they're always done because there is so much to be done that it's easier to fall back to a default than it is to go back and reevaluate and see, is there a better way to, let's not recreate the wheel, but see if there's a better wheel, right? So we're going to start this back and forth episode is going to be about what site selectors can do better to empower economic developers. We're going to take a break. Then we're going to come back and talk about what economic developers can do better to empower site selectors. So on the first topic, what can site selectors do better? And you have to remember, I'm new to this industry, right? So a lot of my perspective is coming from when I was an economic developer. But from what I can tell, this rings true. And this is what's going to be great about this podcast. You're going to see my perspectives and views evolve from episode to episode. And I hope that makes this a bit more of a journey, right? And I hope that your views evolve as well. And that, as one listener said, you're able to take this podcast home at the end of the day and give it to your significant other, and all of a sudden that light bulb moment will go off. And apparently, I've done a good enough job that an economic developer friend of mine, their significant other, actually understands what he does for a job now. That, to me, is a win. Because those late nights at the office, those late nights at celebratory events, dinners with prospects, it can be daunting, and it can put a toll on your personal life as well. So don't ever forget, again, that we're all people, and it's important for us to take a break, even when you feel like you've got no breath left to take and you just need to keep pushing. It's okay to take a break every once in a while. We all need it, right? So what can site selectors do better to empower economic developers? First of all, and this is such a small thing, but acknowledge the effort, right? Acknowledge the effort. Especially, let's just go back to that dreaded RFI, right? Economic developers invest significant time, resources, political capital in preparing request for information responses, RFI responses. And a lot of the times they go through all of that work. And if you're a local economic developer, you're typically being forced to send that up through the state economic development corporation. And then it gets routed out to the site selection consultant. And then somehow, by way of magic, it gets to the company. And a lot of the times I felt as an economic developer, I put all this blood, sweat, and tears into an RFI response, like really, really put this thing together nice. And despite the hours of work and the number of phone calls I had to place to get the answers I needed, guess what? Didn't even receive an acknowledgement of the RFI. Didn't even receive an acknowledgement. And that is... Economic developers have to have a very thick skin, but even the thickest skinned of anyone starts to, you start to wonder whether or not you're doing things right. If you can't even get an acknowledgement on 80% of the RFIs you respond to, or 60%, or whatever it may be, right? It's demoralizing and it's tiring, and you never know if there's something you could have been doing better, or if it's just simply that's how this process works. You do all this work, you submit it, and you hope beyond hope that you get their attention so you can at least have a conversation to answer some of those questions that you just couldn't possibly answer in a sanitized RFI. And so what's the solution here? Well, I think that the easy solution for us in site selection is always find a way, build into your process, always acknowledge receipt of RFIs. Even if that community, even if that community isn't selected to go from the long list down to a short list, right? A simple thank you can go a long way. If as an economic developer, I at least received either through the state or directly from the site selector, hey, thank you so much. I appreciate, you putting this together, or even just saying, hey, thank you, confirming receipt, We've got it. We'll get back to you if we have additional questions. That right there, I think, would have helped me to have grown as an economic developer a lot faster than getting into my own head and question, am I the right person for the job? Am I doing this appropriately? Am I answering in such a way that nobody even wants to have a conversation with me, right? So I think it's a simple response. And that's about that relationship again, right? It's a simple thing to do. Just always acknowledge receipt of RFIs. Plain and simple. The second thing, after acknowledging the effort, second thing I think that site selectors can do better to empower economic developers is, well, it's to help economic developers get through a bit of that pain of losing, right? Because 99% of the projects that an economic developer submits on, you're not going to win, right? If any community was winning every project that they were submitted on, or they were, winning half of the projects they were submitted on, well, they wouldn't have jobs anymore because their community would be full up, given how many projects have been out there. So again, thick skin, but some of these projects as economic developers, you really put your hearts into, right? You see this project, it feels like this is it. This is the exact opportunity my community has been waiting for. I am going to do everything I can. We are going to craft a creative, unique, bespoke response package that we're going to get sent out. We're going to find ways to get around and start trying to make sure that we're noticed, put some sort of marketing campaign out there. We are going to work our butts off because this is the one. This is the one, right? And so then maybe you get shortlisted. Holy crap, you actually get a response back. Thank you so much. You made it through to round 2. We are going to be, here's phase 2 of the RFI with much more detailed questions that are unique to your site that we need you to fill out. And then maybe you get shortlisted even further and you get that fantastic email stating we're coming to town for a site visit. We're going to come. We want to see what your community is all about. You got our attention. And so no matter which part, now the further you go along, the more it hurts, but no matter which part of that you lose in, it still hurts. It stings as an economic developer. So what can site selectors do? Well, this isn't about, make everybody feel good, kumbaya, right? It is to a bit because, again, we're all humans. But providing, as I've mentioned before, provide that post-mortem report. There we go. That post-mortem report. Provide constructive feedback, right? Give the economic developer 30 minutes of your time on a Teams call or a Zoom call. Explain why the site wasn't chosen. Explain what they did really well, right? Where the site really shines, what it needs to be better, why it wasn't selected for this project. It helps economic developers learn and improve, which is good for everybody. You want them to be able to do a better job by their communities, right? And oh, by the way, if they were good enough that they made it to a shortlist, don't you think they're going to make it to your shortlist again for the next project? And don't you want them to have had some constructive feedback that they could have taken back and worked with to make their value proposition that much stronger? That means you have that much better of a community and site to look at for the next one. So provide constructive feedback. 30-minute call. That's all it takes. I will get on the phone with an economic developer and I'll literally run through, here's how many sites, if I can, right? You can't every single time because sometimes your clients say, we don't even want you to do that. Well, if that's the case, at least tell the economic developer, hey, I can't get into more details. Very sorry you didn't make the cut. Wish you best next time. But if I can get into it, I'll provide, here's where you ranked according to all, 60 sites that were submitted. Here's where you ranked. Yeah, that's a little lower than we were expecting. Here's why. Well, it's because your XYZ partner didn't even fill out their section. And that was a critical component. And I'm sorry, but at that point in the process, we were looking for communities that wanted this thing, and that sent a signal that you didn't really want it, right? Or that there was an issue that was trying to be hidden. So provide as much constructive feedback as you can. The third major point here is, again, we keep going back to it, but it's about transparency in decision-making, right? We started with, it all snowballs. Economic developers invest significant time and resources in preparing RFI responses. They put their hearts and souls into attracting projects. When they lose, it stings. A lot of the times, they're not even getting responses back or acknowledgments, right? So the issue is that economic developers often wonder why their community or their site was rejected. Because decision making, as it needs to, because this is a corporate decision, it happens behind closed doors, and the economic developers on the outside submitting a proposal in and hoping that they're going to even find out what the outcome was. So to the extent possible, and this is one where I'm going to readily admit this is probably not as possible as in other areas, but try to share as a site selector during your post-mortem report, try to share what the decision criteria was without compromising client confidentiality. But you can say, listen, labor was extraordinarily important because we have to be able to hire 1,200 employees. And I'm very sorry, but you're a community of 80,000 and your unemployment rate is at like sub 3%. There just wasn't room. Everything else, right? We cared about site readiness. We cared about utilities. That was all fantastic. But this one point, it was so concerning to us that we didn't even see wiggle room for negotiations. And so you didn't even make it from the bottom of the pile. There was no reason for further discussion, right? At least at that point, the economic developer goes, okay, it was the wrong project. Yep, should have seen that one coming. I had these numbers in front of me. All right, lesson learned, right? So if a site selector can explain what mattered the most, cost, logistics, workforce, etc., that goes a long way in providing some transparency so that economic developers can be more empowered to do an even more fantastic job than they already do the next time. The fourth major point or area where economic developers can be empowered is, well, it has to do with community impact considerations. Economic developers have to think beyond the bottom line. Economic developers advocate for community benefits, jobs, new tax revenue, infrastructure, corporate partnerships, right? Good corporate citizens. You have a certain tolerance for environmental emissions or degradations, right? Depending on where you are and what type of community you're in. Site selectors, well, we consider the long-term impact of a project. And we engage with local stakeholders. But try to find a way as you're speaking to your clients, and a lot of us do, the majority of us probably do, but find a way to balance the business needs, that bottom line, with community well-being. And here's where trying to find a way to close that gap between economic developers seem to be focused just beyond the bottom line and site selectors seem to only be focused on the bottom line. I think here's where there's some common ground. A company doesn't ever want to make a decision. If they go back and look at the site selection decisions they've made over the years, those communities in which they have ramrodded down the notion that we need X, Y, Z in incentives and you're going to do this for us, that for us, boom, 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 and they get to town, are you really that welcomed of a new corporate citizen? Or do you start off kind of on the wrong foot because you push too hard? Wouldn't it be better to find the right community where your principles and pillars of priority align with the community's goals and principles for itself? So then you fit that much better. And maybe the cost is a little bit more, right? I'm not saying that we need to forego the concept of cost because all companies are, live and die by making money. That's what a for-profit company is all about. But is there a way to marry up finding a place where where a company can make its expected returns on its investment and fulfill its business objectives and also be a fantastic corporate citizen? And so this one's a little more nebulous, right? But let's find a way, and I don't have an answer to this one yet. I think that by way of doing qualitative analyses about a community, you can determine whether or not the company is a good fit or not. But I'd like to at least identify areas where we can figure out whether or not this is a good marriage between the company and the community, not only from a bottom line perspective, but also from just an ethos perspective. And finally, and this one ties back into, other points I've made as well. The fifth area that we can do a better job is timely communication, right? Radio silence from site selectors is never helpful, right? Because either then the economic developer just continues to submit that site for other projects, and all of a sudden when the site selector reaches back out, you have to go, hey, sorry, I don't know what you told your client, but it's gone. We thought that you weren't interested anymore. Or it just adds to that backlog and slog of just projects dying on the vine, right? Economic developers are eagerly awaiting updates after site visits or proposal submissions, right? You have to go into your monthly or quarterly board meetings and provide updates to your pipeline. The best thing that a site selector can do, if you can build it into your schedule, is regularly provide updates to economic developers, even if there's no news. It shows respect and maintains trust. Because I guarantee you what, when we need something or we're looking for an update from an economic developer, if that response isn't to us within 24 hours, 48 hours, we start to get a little peeved, right? Because our clients are clamoring on the back end for some sort of answer or an analysis. Don't forget, economic developers have stakeholders in the background that are doing the same thing to them. And so as small as it seems, right, a lot of these are very small. Acknowledge receipt of the RFI, provide constructive feedback with a 30-minute call, share decision criteria if possible, right? Consider the bottom line, how that can still be married up with the concept of does the community and the company's ethos, are they aligned? And again, another very simple way to empower economic developers, give them updates. Even if there's no news, every Friday I have an email blast that I have ready to go out that just basically says, hey, very sorry, no news this week. We'll get back to you as soon as we have something, right? I have it set on auto for all my projects. And it's as simple as that. It took me an hour to set up originally, and now I just have to copy paste the template. And you know what? It's obvious that it's a template email at the end of the week, but hey, at least you're getting something, right? So anyways, that's this side of the token. Let's find ways to make economic developers' jobs easier, allow them to set better expectations internally, and make them better so that every time we come back, they can be a better version of themselves, even though, as I've said at the beginning of this, economic developers are pretty darn badass already, so that's kind of hard, but we owe it to them as site selectors. We can empower them, and when we come back from the break, we're going to flip it around and see what economic developers can do better to empower us as site selectors. See you in a sec. Okay, and we're back. So we're going to flip it around a bit here, right? And we're going to find ways that, well, believe it or not, economic developers, you guys have such a profound impact on us as site selectors that well, I hope that when we get through this section, you're going to realize just how many ways that you do. So we're going to start off with understanding site selectors' needs, right? This is all going to be about now how economic developers can better empower site selectors. I think it's important, first of all, for economic developers to better understand a site selector's needs, right? Don't assume just because every project RFI or communication seems to come in the same sterile, standardized format that there isn't a human on the other side of that that's worked meticulously to craft that RFI specific to their client's needs for this specific project. So economic developers will tend to come in assuming that they know what site selectors want, right? I've been part of plenty of conversations as an economic developer going, well, this is what they think they want. No, we're going to provide this, right? That could be the reason why you get eliminated so much if you in any area of life, right? Where you make an assumption about somebody else. And so instead of assuming what site selectors want for every single project, talk to them, talk to us, engage in open conversations, go through the RFI, go through the request, right? Have a conversation internally and ask the site selector, hey, can I get 15 minutes on your calendar? That would really help us to ensure that we are scoping this thing out appropriately, and we're going to give you the right response to what you're looking for. And then you get on that call and you listen, right? You ask probing questions to understand specific project requirements, industry preferences, decision-making factors, if the site selector can share it. Because that's going to show that you care, you're listening, and guess what? At the end of the day, your response is going to be much more tailored to what the site selector and the company are looking for than maybe if you just threw your random normal responses against the wall and hoped that something stuck this time. Speaking of data, the second area where economic developers can do better in empowering site selectors is by providing comprehensive data. It is about quality, folks. It's about quality over quantity. Sometimes, now the first issue is something I think a lot of us talk about over and over and over again. Please don't put TBD as a response to something. All right, don't provide TBD. Or when we come to town for a site tour and we spent money and our time to get in town, and you have all your partners up there and their answers continuously are, well, we don't know, but we'll look into that and get back to you. You should know if this project is the right fit for your community. You should know the answer to the question. Right now, maybe the site selector hasn't given you enough time, in which case I wouldn't put TBD. I would say we need some more time to answer this fully because it's such an important question. But the flip side is sometimes economic developers, and I was a big time violator of this, but sometimes economic developers can inundate site selectors. Economic developers can inundate site selectors with excessive data, right? Okay, you want the due diligence on the property? Boom. Here's a zip drive to 1,300 pages worth of technical data that, hey, you're the expert, you can get through it. That isn't quality over quantity. And so what can you do, right? If you know that this site, you continuously have to submit due diligence information about the site, right? Geotechnical information, topography information, wetlands, environmental reports. Something that I did as an economic developer and I would greatly appreciate as a site selector, put together an executive summary of the due diligence. Point out, hey, for your phase 1 environmental site assessment, there were no issues. There was one area that was called out there. You can go to this page in the document, and basically here's what it's talking about. Give us a call if you have any questions. For your topography, hey, well, the way that the RFI was crafted, it's asking for the minimum topo and the maximum topo, and for us, we had to say 20 foot. Well, that's because on one side of the site, it drops off. The rest of the site is like a 1 foot difference. Don't even bother going through all the topography maps and reports. You can if you want, they're there for you, but we're just telling you the majority of the site where you would actually be building a building is like a 6-inch difference, right? It's nothing, it's negligible. Make it easier. Make sure we have all the backup documentation, right? But have it so your primary submission, unless we ask differently, make sure your primary submission is as easy as possible for you to hammer home the main points, for better or for worse. So you would curate relevant information. You'd focus on critical factors like infrastructure. Boom, here's where you can find the existing, and here's where you can find our proposed solution for your client. Workforce, boom, here's where you can find the existing, here's where you can see some nuances, and here's where we propose XYZ. Incentives, boom, right? Very, very high level, hard-hitting responses backed up by all the comprehensive data. A third way that economic developers can empower site selectors: foster relationships beyond projects. I continuously phrase the site selector and economic developer relationship in terms of the RFI, and that is on me. That is only a snapshot of the relationship. The relationship itself, economic developers often only interact during active projects, right? Because you're so busy. That's what happens. But you can still find ways to build genuine relationships with site selectors. And that's on site selectors as well to make sure that they are open and available and willing to build those genuine relationships. Most of us are. I'll tell you that. Most of us are. So economic developers, attend industry events. Share insights on LinkedIn, right? Respond to site selectors posts on LinkedIn. Collaborate with site selectors even when there's no immediate project at hand. Something that I did when I was at my last gig at River Ridge was we knew we needed to refresh our website. Well, instead of us just assuming what site selectors and other audiences needed or wanted to see or how they wanted to see it, I sent out a survey. Now, a number of folks were too busy to respond to it, right? But those that did, I actually ended up developing pretty strong relationships with them because they saw that we were trying to do better. We weren't trying to do it in a siloed up way. We recognized that we needed to ask the questions so that we could better serve them, so that when a site selector was looking for information, they could go on the website and boom, there it was, in the way that they were hoping they would find it. Instead of a bunch of PDF documents they'd have to go through, cull through, and type up all the information that's already in there so they'd be able to pull it. There's an entire interactive map, or there's an entire interactive spreadsheet that I can take, pull, navigate, manipulate the data, use it as much as I need so that I can get whatever my deliverable is done at 11 p.m. that night for my client without having to figure out how to reach out and wake you up, right? So there's ways to interact and foster relationships beyond the projects. It doesn't just have to be, let's grab a drink, or, hey, how are your kids doing? You can reach out and show that you respect them as individuals and professionals as well by asking for their feedback. Now, again, site selectors, very busy. I just chastised us for not spending enough time giving postmortem reports or communicating appropriately. Easier said than done, right? And maybe we'll figure out how to manage time appropriately or find those elusive extra 2 hours in every day that everybody's been looking for on this podcast, but I doubt it. These are thoughts and nuggets for us to just take back, sit back for a second and go, I have been so busy filling out RFIs recently and conducting and hosting, site visits. When was the last time I checked in with Devin? I'm going to see how he's doing. And you know what? Oh, his LinkedIn page, he just posts about XYZ. I'm going to reach out to see why. Just see what's going on in his life, right? Reach out, and even if Devin, that jerk, doesn't respond, well, at least he's going to have seen that you put the effort forth to get to know him, and eventually that will yield dividends. The other thing that economic developers can do, and this also goes to access of information, is be a little more proactive in marketing your sites, right? So economic developers typically will take your sites and put in some sort of state repository, like a Zoom prospector, or you get it, listed with a broker, or goes right. You expect that that's the way to go about it, but that's not the most active way to promote available sites. You need to regularly update these site databases. You need to highlight unique features and advantages. Don't just throw up the flyer and expect that that's going to catch the bait that you're looking for, right? You need to put it up onto these various databases. You need to make sure that they're consistently updated. You need to make sure that you're back to the whole comprehensive information. Don't inundate with too much. Make sure that some features of the site that really stand out, make sure that they stand out in your listing. The other thing you can do is find a way to provide regularly updated information to site selectors. Maybe select a key 10 site selectors that focus in on the industry that you think this site is going to go for, right? And every time a new due diligence document is put together, or every time a new workforce program is established, or compile it, send it to those site selectors and say, hey, I'm sending this to you personally because I know what your industry focus is. I would like to proactively have a conversation with you. If you have any questions about this new program or this new due diligence on the site, please give me a call. We can set up time. Otherwise, want to make sure you had it. And if I received that versus just, an auto e-blast, or I have to go and look for it and I'm not, pulling my hair out looking for a site at that second, I'm going to pay a little more attention. And that's going to go into my personal database, likely, as long as it's a good site. If it's not, hopefully I'm doing the right thing and I'm telling you, right? And that goes into my fifth area where economic developers can do better for empowering site selectors. Lean in on and leverage technology. Economic developers tend to rely on outdated methods, right? We tend to rely on what we have been taught. And so you typically just have the PDFs. You've got, maybe your listings are in some of the typical databases, but there's really nothing that stands out. It's just another picture of property or like a cornfield with all of your normal crap that you're going to see in a real estate listing, right? Instead of, and I'm very sorry to my publishing friends out there, but instead of spending all of your money on putting together, full page print ads every year, right, or every quarter, why don't you take some of that money and put it towards doing some GIS mapping, putting together some virtual tours, find a way to develop an interactive platform to showcase your sites more effectively. The more you can stand out and make it easier for us to, from a distance, understand that site, the better you're going to do. Because number one, I am then going to have a better job, an easier job visualizing exactly what it is and the benefits are of that site. It's also going to be easier for me to communicate those out to my clients. And you're going to stand out, right? When there's hundreds of communities with thousands of sites out there, how do you stand out more? Spend some time, spend some money, pool together resources. If you're a smaller community that doesn't have that type of money to do full-blown virtual tours, interactive platforms, see if you can partner up with your local tech college or university. See if it can become a project for a student, right? There are GIS-related degrees out there. There are data visualization degrees out there. You are a perfect example of a place where somebody would want to work for some sort of course credit, right? Or if you can pay them, please pay them. If you can pay them, right, for some sort of dollar amount, for you to actually put together, or for the kid to put together a fantastic product for you that's going to make you stand out. So leverage your technology. Leverage your technology. Don't go overboard where it's so unique and custom that I can't do anything with it, right? Especially if that's how you expect me to get your data. But find a way to get my attention. Find a way to get my attention. I love to repeat things. Ooh, I'm now realizing that's something I do. Okay. Check that one off for oops. Anyways, we're going to take one last break here. We're going to get into some real life examples. We're going to go through some takeaways, and then we're going to close this thing down. And, last episode, I had mentioned that the next thing you're going to hear was my first story from the road. That was supposed to be recorded today, but we are going to be recording early next week. So that is incoming. I have not forgotten about you. I'm really excited about that series. Just trying to get it off the ground for you. So as soon as you hear who the first person is, we can all give that person grief moving forward. How about that? Sorry, buddy. Talk to you soon. Other side of the break. Bye. All right, let's tell some war stories. Always my favorite part here, right? Well, the first part is going to be less so the war stories and more so the success stories. We're going to tell some good real life examples of where site selectors and economic developers nailed it, right? Acknowledging the RFIs, providing the feedback, building strong relationships. Second part's going to be a bit more of the war stories. So for the good, there was one project that I was working a couple years ago where I absolutely loved working with this site selector because you always knew the more frequent the cadence in communication, the better you were doing, right? And so it was a lot easier for me to set expectations internally and also juggle a lot of different balls that were up in the air as I was trying to figure out solutions for them while, oh, by the way, I may have had another prospect looking at the same site. And so I would go from, you would submit your RFI to, you would actually get an acknowledgement, right? And so then I can boom check in my pipeline report that this thing's live. And then maybe you get a, hey, we have some feedback or some questions for you. If you can respond to that in a week, fantastic. Okay, I know I'm in the hunt. Excellent. And then it got to, okay, a little bit of silence. And then, hey, so we have some technical questions. We'd like to get on a call. We get on the call, right? And then all of a sudden, hey, we're coming in for a site visit. Fantastic. Site visit happens, and then it's like, we want to have weekly calls with you because this project is heating up so fast where the decision is imminent, and we need to make sure that we are always on the same page. Boom, 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 boom. And you know what? I felt like I was part of the team, and you had me more engaged with you and talking you up even more as an economic developer than if it was just submit and silence. So that for me, that was a very empowering moment as an economic developer, having a site selector that actually brought me in and treated me like I was part of the team. There was another site selection group where every time they came to town and we sat down, it wasn't this is the team thing again, right? It wasn't okay, make your presentations and we'll tell you where you're wrong. It was more of a, how do we sit down with your various partners and have conversations to find solutions to make sure that if this is the site, that this is going to be the site, right? It felt like we were all sitting around the table trying to find the right solution. And listen, I know that they were doing the same thing with the other girl they took to the dance, right? But it felt as though we had a true shot at it and we were uncovering everything we needed to uncover because we were all being transparent with each other. We were being proactive in our communications. It was a good working relationship. I mean, even down to the point where we were drawing a rail line on the map and how can we curve this thing around so that it meets, the rail standards for how fast this freight's going to be moving. And oh, by the way, so that we're not clipping off, a good amount of this property and the owner isn't paying for something they can't use, right? A very collaborative discussion. Almost felt like my own internal team having the design discussion. The other way that, another good story here was when I was able to, as a site selector, tell an economic developer, hey, I'm just going to let you know, we were on a site visit. I was able to pull them into another room and say, hey man, client is not happy about that response, right? I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to help pivot them, right? Because I think the response is different from what we just heard. So we're going to go ahead and pivot, but I'm going to give you that opportunity to refresh this. All right. And guess what? At the end of the whole thing, when we were debriefing just the client and myself on the way out, I was right. The client looked at me and went, I don't know what you did, but that first response they gave was borderline offensive. Then we realized that we were applying our own bias and we were misunderstanding what they were trying to tell us. And so a few minutes later, after you guys all came back in and they re-explained their answer, that right there is likely what just kept that site alive for our consideration. And guess what? At the end of the day, that's where that project went. It could have been lost because if I would not have taken the time to sit down with the economic developer and have that conversation, give them an opportunity to correct because I understood my client, understood them. I knew where the mismatch was. The client could have gone to the second best site. The other way that site selectors at least can help economic developers be better is, where possible, say how far behind the economic developers community is compared to the competition. Number one, that helps to stoke competition, right? It does, plain and simple. But number two, it also helps them to understand, oh, so when you're saying we're behind, you mean like we're behind. We really want this project, so we're going to figure out a way to close that gap. Or, this project might be a little too expensive for us. We're going to bow out. Unless there's something we can do otherwise, right? It's about being transparent and having the conversations. And in all of those circumstances, we either shortcutted the amount of time that a project was dying on the vine and let everybody cut bait and move on, or in the case of the one that I mentioned, the project actually ended up going to that community because that conversation was had instead of just allowing it to fester. Now, for the war stories, we're going to keep them a little vague here, right, to protect confidentiality. But I've experienced this on both sides of the table, on the economic development side and the site selection side. If site selectors or companies do not regularly provide updates, but they are maintaining this static list of all of these different sites around the country that are available for our picking and choosing at our whim, given how intense, especially the industrial real estate market is these days, how many mega projects are out there, that is a critical flaw. I've seen time and time again where there was not enough communication involved between an economic developer and or his or her community and the site selector. Site selector was not checking in regularly. And then site selector's client all of a sudden says, yep, we want to investigate that site further. We think that's the one. Site selector then reaches out to the economic developer a couple months after the last communication. Economic developer says, I'm sorry, but that site's under option with somebody else. I haven't heard from you in months. And then the site selector has to figure out how to go back and do damage control and find another site that is just as enticing to the client as maybe that one was. That comes down to client management on behalf of the site selectors. It comes down to communication between the site selectors and the economic developers. It comes down to, in that situation, economic developer probably should have alerted anybody else that they had put the site in front of that they had received an option on it. A lot of failures on that front. And that just wastes time and it hurts reputations. Assumptions are never something Assumptions are never something that we want to make in this industry either, right? When I was an economic developer, we had a site selection group who made an assumption that because their project was the hottest thing since sliced bread in their minds and their clients' minds, and because we had the land, that we would obviously part with some of our land to get this project. And so unbeknownst to us as economic developers, the site selector had been telling their client about our site over and over again, getting them really excited. They've been doing desktop reviews and everything was panning out. Well, they came to us and I had to flat out look them in the face and say, that site is right next to our rail line and it's primed in our master plan for rail served industry. Is your client going to use rail? Well, that's proposed rail. That doesn't matter, does it? Well, it does, because that's what our community is expecting after we've made an investment in upgrading the rail infrastructure. That we are going to land rail-served industrial projects within that section of the park. Well, but our project is boom, boom, right? Boom, that's another thing I've been doing. Boom, boom, boom. Where is that coming from? Folks, I don't know. Welcome to the journey. Well, our client, this is the number one site they're looking for, and there's nothing else out there that we can find that even comes close. And I'm sorry, this is not the right fit. Well, do you have anything else? We don't right now. We don't. And then the site selector's in trouble. The client's disappointed. We then get in trouble with the site selector because, well, we let them down despite the fact it wasn't our fault. Again, nothing works out well with assumptions. And then there's the absolute worst part, when you get community backlash. Say you go through the entire process and nobody catches on to something, and on the back end when it's announced, oh my gosh, the community is in an uproar. This hasn't happened to me, but I've heard enough war stories where billboards start going up and citizens action coalitions start getting formed. And guys, we have to have the hard conversations as we're trying to figure out whether or not we're going to get married, right? The longer we allow those to fester or to not be addressed, the worse they can get. And trust me, they can get bad. Do we all remember what happened to HQ2, the second part of HQ2 out east? Yeah, they got run out of town. That was a disappointment to everybody. So we are done with this week's episode. I think, listen, the takeaways from this one are, number one, mutual respect. Just acknowledge the effort on both sides. And that goes for both sides. Number two, as always, transparency matters. Be open about decision-making. Economic developers, why you're deciding to submit certain sites versus others. Site selectors, what factors matter the most if either side can share and as much as you can share. And then plain and simple, folks, because this podcast is about humanizing the profession, empathy is always going to win. Understand the emotional impact of wins and losses. It is inherent in what we do. Don't ever forget that, because the more you can empathize with the person on the other side of the table, the stronger that relationship and the better the trust. So that is the end of this episode. Next week on Site Selectors Are People 2, we are going to dig into the realities of site selecting, what it's like for a site selector as they are going through the process. Please, if you have any questions or any feedback, shoot them my way. I'd love to build them in like I did with the last episode. And between now and next week, you are going to hear the first story from the road. Again, the delay is thanks to the guest. And I'm going to say that because if he didn't listen to this, then he won't bring it up and I will know. Anyways, folks, it's always a pleasure. And this is Devin Hillsdon-Smith reminding you that economic developers and site selectors are people too. Happy Economic Development Week. Cheers. Just a heads up, views expressed in this podcast are solely my own and are not attributable to any employers, whether past or present. Thank you.